For me, in my day job, I work quite often with businesses on sustainable development. And the questions come up from a lot of business leaders to us. Are you going to be there, and how can we get involved, and where do the business leaders fit in? So that's a question I've got to you in terms of what do you see happening with the business community? Because I know in the work that we do that there are companies out there that are saying we're carbon neutral, we're even going beyond that, we're going restorative and these sorts of things. So I feel like some of the business leaders are actually making bolder statements than the political leaders are at this stage. And I don't know what the forum is for them at Copenhagen. I know obviously it's a political meeting, but when business leaders are approaching an NGO, which is where I work, to ask, or how can we get involved, that's never happened, at least in my time there, that's never happened.
I think this is partly because businesses recognise that the customers that are buying their goods and their services just simply expect these services and these goods to be, if not absolutely climate neutral, then as close as it's possible to get today. The business is generally a quick responder, isn't it? The price signals in the market are very, very sensitive, and the smarter ones adapt very, very quickly, and that's what's happening. And it's happening because customers, all of us, are saying to these businesses, we don't want to buy your heavy carbon goods. We want things that we can feel proud to wear and to watch and to play with. So this is a very important dynamic. It's creating a new dynamic on the ground. And I agree with you. I think business leaders are becoming very enlightened about this because they know that their businesses will disappear if they don't. They can see the way that the wind is blowing. Now, of course, these business leaders are very important in the context of what we talked about earlier, this idea that what we're doing is transitioning to a low-carbon economy. Business leaders, and this is how I think business needs to get involved, business leaders need to be saying to the politicians in their country, to the governments, to the prime ministers, need to be saying, we can do this. We can do this, and this is what we need. Now, what most business leaders that I talk to say in this context is what we need more than anything else is a price for carbon, because what that will do is to create the market environment in which high carbon goods become, in effect, too, people just won't buy them, they're too expensive. So once you've got a carbon price, so what I say is business leaders out there should be lobbying their governments to say, we're ready to do this, and we see big opportunities here, but what we need you to do is to do a deal that contains a price for carbon so that carbon price is then part of the new economy.
We didn't even get into cap and trade and carbon taxation and everything. We don't have time, unfortunately. But that's a very good point, though. But I think also touching upon what you were saying there, Rich, about businesses really starting to take this seriously. I think that I have to agree with you from what you said earlier, Andrew, about mainstreaming climate into policy, into consumer decisions, into business culture. I think that actually we have come an enormously long way in the past 2 or 3 years now. And some environmentalists that seem like they feel that we're not going fast enough. This is a crisis. The world is collapsing. True, it is an urgent situation, but I think we've come a very long way in a rather short amount of time, considering that only a few years ago, climate was really being discussed in any sort of mainstream way. Yeah. And I think that bodes very well for the future. And whether or not we reach agreement in Copenhagen, I think that we are moving in that direction where whether it's sometime afterwards or a year afterwards, something will happen. There will be some binding commitment broadly based around the world in terms of dealing with climate change. Yeah. And I think that was the message from tonight's show, actually. I think that there's a certain optimism here, even though there is quite a bit of anxiety, it seems, around Copenhagen. It seems like people are trying to bring expectations down a little bit, but I think that sometime after that we probably will get where the world needs to go. And post-Copenhagen, we haven't really talked that much about that. What will happen? I mean, is there going to be a COP16? Is that already scheduled? What will happen in Copenhagen, whether or not an agreement is reached?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot depends on what happens at Copenhagen, but the process continues. In effect, this is a UN-led process to negotiate a global agreement on climate change. So if that fully-fledged legal agreement is not created in Copenhagen, then it will be created at some point after Copenhagen. But the important thing is that at Copenhagen, we take a massive step forward. We say that we're going to do this deal, and we say this is what the deal is going to contain. And in effect, what that does is to hand on to the negotiators, back down to the negotiators, the role of putting into legal form the political commitments that their leaders have made. And that will probably be in the form of a continued part of that process. Who knows? It could be a COP16, but we would want to be in a position to believe that this could be done very quickly after Copenhagen, because we need, frankly, to get on with it.
Well, how about this, Andrew? Why don't we have you come back sometime after Copenhagen and interpret the whole situation for us once again?
I'll certainly do that. Be very pleased to do that. And if I could just be allowed one personal message tonight, there are 4 people listening at home. There's Helen, my wife, and my 3 kids, Alex, Ben, and Livy. And they know how much I care about climate change. We talk a lot about it at home. A lot of people talk about the responsibility that they feel to their kids for creating the right kind of planet for them to grow up in. It's certainly something. You ask about why I'm interested in this, and it's got a lot to do with those kids, so I'm really pleased they're listening.
For all the right reasons, Andrew Mitchell here in the studio here tonight on Think Globally Radio. Thank you very much. Always great having you, and really bring a really wide perspective into this very complex situation, obviously, with the world trying to negotiate. And I think you said it was the most complicated treaty of all time, perhaps?
I would think so, yeah.
Could very well be. So for me, Eric Paglia, and Richard Bloom here in the studio, tonight's edition of Think Globally Radio comes to a close. Visit us online at thinkgloballyradio.org. Tonight's show will be up there probably by tomorrow or the next day. Then you can download that and listen to it all over again, because a lot of information here. You have to listen to these shows 2 or 3 times to really understand all the things we're talking about. So thank you again, Andrew, and hope to see you again in the future, perhaps in Copenhagen. And we'll be back next Sunday night at 7 o'clock for another edition of Think Globally Radio.